In a shocking turn of events, Amari Huggins-Bruce is back at the University of Louisville. But is he going to play? More on that and how the ACC is completely wide open in 2024 coming up on today's episode of Locked On Louisville.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what is going on, everyone? Welcome into this Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I want to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. Today's episode of the show brought to you by Ultimate GM. Ultimate College Football HC is a brand new mobile game that is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB, that's all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Begin your coaching legacy today. It's been a notable past couple days on multiple fronts as it relates to U of L. Amari Huggins-Bruce is re-enrolled at classes at Louisville, but is he going to play this season? That's the question to be answered. We'll attempt to do so coming up here shortly. Florida State, shocking loss in Ireland to Georgia Tech, reiterates that this conference is wide open this year. What we learned from this past weekend of games coming up here shortly, and then to conclude the show, we'll dive into a Monday mailbag. But specifically for U of L, the most notable news from the past couple of days, Amari Huggins-Bruce is back. But is he fully back? Well, ever since he left the program after the Holiday Bowl and committed to South Carolina, rumors started swirling that he wanted to return. You know, this was all throughout the spring, even the early parts of summer. But as more and more time passed, the likeliness of a possible return obviously became, more and more less likely. And it seemed like that door had shut up until about a week ago. The smoke started to build up so much to where you believe that where the smoke was, there was some type of a fire. And then the official news came out that he had re-enrolled at the University of Louisville. He's in the student directory. He beat the deadline to the last day to enroll in classes, I believe, is today, August 26th on this Monday. But there's questions as to why did he leave South Carolina? Some would say that it was due to false NIL promises. Those down in Columbia probably would point to the fact that he was falling down the depth chart. Regardless, it doesn't matter because the reality is that he's no longer with the Gamecocks program. He's now at the University of Louisville. The main question here is he going to be eligible this season for the Cardinals? I know that in the current day and age of the NCAA and the transfer portal, getting that eligibility waiver has been easier than it has ever been, but you still have to go out and get it. I think Matt McGavick, co-host of From the Pink Seats podcast, made a really great point in a recent episode of that show from the State of Louisville podcast network. He basically, in paraphrasing here, said that this doesn't happen unless Louisville feels confident that they can get Amari eligible. And I completely agree with that sentiment. Is it going to be something that we see right away? Like, is he going to be ruled eligible this week? I'm not really sure. But I think as long as he's ruled eligible before, let's say, that third game of the season against Georgia Tech, then I think it's, good news for Louisville. So what we're about to talk about is all under the assumption that he's going to be eligible this season. Because if he's not, then it sucks for this year. Sort of like with some of the basketball transfers that will be out for the season. It sucks for the near future, but it definitely helps next season. And having a veteran like Amari on next year's team with no Lacy, with no Ja'Cory Brooks, etc., I think that definitely helps. But for the moment, we're going to operate under the assumption that he is going to be ruled eligible, and hopefully we get some light shed on that situation coming up here in the next day or so. But truthfully, AHB coming back to Louisville is significant for two reasons. The most notable is the Caullin Lacy injury. Lacy is set to miss probably close to the first half of the season with a broken collarbone that he sustained in a scrimmage just about 2 weeks ago, a week ago. Him being out emphasizes the need for some players to step up. You look at the depth chart, Ja'Cory Brooks, Chris Bell are going to get the majority of the snaps out on the boundary, but with Lacy being a slot receiver, there are questions as to who's going to rise in his absence. You know, Jimmy Callaway, Jaden Thompson being some players they look at, Jaleel McClain, Blue Hicks, JoJo Stone, some unproven pieces that could rise to the forefront. But bringing a guy like Amari Huggins-Bruce back, who plays at that position in the slot, has played multiple seasons of ACC ball, and knows Jeff Brom's offense, you can't really discredit the significance in that regard. So bringing back a player that has a lot of experience and has played in this offense and has some explosiveness and plays at the position that Caullin Lacy plays, that's really key insurance for the first part of the season. And even when Lacy returns at some point in 2024, being able to have the depth at that position speaks volumes to the just the overall security at the wide receiver spot and being able to have multiple weapons that you can utilize in the offense. It gives you some flexibility on how you deploy Caullin Lacy in some packages. But ultimately, the main thing for me is that it's significant because it's a direct replacement for Caullin Lacy as long as he's going to be injured. And I sort of alluded to it. The second reason is the overall depth. You bring in an explosive receiver with multiple years of experience that knows this offense, that's going to be able to come in and leave an impact on a specific game, multiple games, the season as a whole. So yeah, I don't really look at this as there being any drawback because you bring in a receiver that you're familiar with, and it beats the alternative of not having him. Like some people are like, well, Amari's not all that great. Having AHB is 1,000% better than not having AHB. Let's put it that way. I was really hoping that he wasn't going to leave at the end of the season. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, but I guess better late than never on a return. The main thing now is going to be whether or not he gets ruled eligible. Speaking of the production, what you can expect from Amari, let's call it how it is here. I think two things are true at one time. Number one, Amari's not a star receiver. And what I mean by that, when I say that, but don't take that as me saying that he's not a good player. I don't think that he's a number one on a Louisville team. However, let me also add that I don't think he's really been supported all that well through his Louisville career. Like, he's played 3 seasons here, and I just feel like the quarterback play and the offenses that he's played in, like the first 2 years, 2021, 2022, Louisville was a run-heavy offense. Like, they ran the ball the majority of the time. You saw, Tyler Hudson get targeted the most in 2022, and it seemed like Amari Huggins-Bruce really wasn't utilized in the right way. 2023, yes, the offensive scheme was better, but Jack Plummer was set on getting the ball to Jamari Thrash. They ran the ball a lot more, and again, his potential was limited due to quarterback play. Now, with Tyler Shuck, if he stays healthy, I think that the sky is the limit. I think you have a quarterback who's finally going to be able to utilize that explosion, that yards after catch potential, and that overall level of skill that Amari has, I think is going to be put at the forefront, and you're going to see a more successful season. So, albeit, I don't think that he's a number one receiver, but Louisville doesn't need a number one receiver right now. They need a reliable player in the slot, which I believe Amari is. I am higher on Amari than I think some fans out there who believe he's just not all that good. And I don't think that's true whatsoever. Amari is a very good player. He just really has kind of got the short end of the stick when it comes to quarterback play, offensive scheme early on in his college career. So ultimately, I like this a lot. Like, this is huge because if he's eligible to play, whether it's, if he gets ruled eligible right away, maybe it takes a little while for him to get acclimated. And I think if he's playing by that third game against Georgia Tech, which is technically week 4, I think that this is really, really good news for Louisville. You don't need him really the first 2 weeks, in my opinion. But overall, if he's playing by that Georgia Tech game, gosh, that's huge news for the Cardinals because I think that Amari's best football is definitely ahead of him. Extremely quick, extremely fast, and explosive. And I think he could be a yards after catch machine with Tyler Shuck leading the Cardinals offense. So huge news in that regard. But as we sort of take a step back and look at the big picture across the ACC, Florida State's loss to Georgia Tech showed me a couple things. I learned a couple things from this past week's games. I'll break them down coming up on the next segment of Locked On Louisville. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Ultimate College Football HC. It's a brand new mobile game that I think you're going to love as much as I do. In this amazing game and simulation, you get to step into the shoes of a head coach and lead your college football program to glory. From recruiting to hiring coaches to overseeing training camps and handling scholarships, you control every crucial detail of your program. And here's what I really love about the game. You're responsible for calling offensive plays during the games. Your strategy will not only determine the success of your season, but shape the future and legacy of your program. Ultimate College Football HC is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and when you want to. Of course, we have a special offer for Locked On Louisville fans. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB. That's all caps inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Make sure you take advantage of this perk as it will get your team off to a great start. To download the game, just visit ultimate-cfb.com. That's ultimate-cfb.com, or look it up on the app stores. Ultimate College Football HC. Begin your coaching legacy today. Cardinal fans, college football is back. It's not too late to catch up before the season kicks off. SEC, ACC, Big 10, Big 12, you can get it all from Locked On's stable of college experts by subscribing to the Locked On College Football podcast. Who has a chance to make the playoff? What teams will cause chaos in their new conferences? Everything you need to know all in one place. Be sure to follow and subscribe to Locked On College Football podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. The ACC is wide open. That's the main takeaway from this past week of games within the conference. Granted, there weren't that many games this weekend, but the most notable being Florida State against Georgia Tech up in Ireland. Florida State got upset. Georgia Tech with the game-winning field goal. They ended up winning the game 24-21. There were 3 main takeaways from this past weekend, and the first one is that the ACC is wide open. Florida State getting that first conference loss is huge for the other teams in the conference because the Seminoles were the projected top team in the conference, and if you lose to a team that you aren't supposed to, and you look at the rest of the schedule, they have to play Clemson, at Miami, North Carolina, so pretty solid games across the schedule. And even if they go undefeated, they still have 1 loss in the conference. Truthfully, I think that there are anywhere from 5 to 7 teams that could end up winning the ACC. I think that Florida State, Louisville, Miami, NC State, North Carolina, and Clemson are the 6 that are probably up there the highest. But don't overlook Georgia Tech now that they beat Florida State. Maybe Virginia Tech sneaks into that conversation. What is Duke going to look like? The ACC is wide open. The Seminoles losing that first game directly benefits all of the other contenders in the conference. So getting that loss out of the way gives your team a little bit of a cushion as it relates to the overall ACC slate. Now, every game matters, of course, that goes without saying. And just because Florida State loses that first game doesn't mean that the season is over for the Seminoles. Like, they could still definitely be back in Charlotte. But I think that the margin for error for this team, coupled by what we saw from both the Seminoles and Georgia Tech, may lead you to believe that, man, this Florida State team looks like a 3 to 4 loss team with DJU at quarterback, and it just doesn't look like a great team at the moment. Now, granted, it's the first game of the season. Teams can turn things around, and they can definitely resurrect their campaign, which I think that they're going to have a chance to do. However, this loss is good for the rest of the conference, for the teams that are looking to get to Charlotte, because I think that if you ask people, would you rather, go up against Florida State for a bid, or would you rather go up against Georgia Tech, you'd probably say Florida State. It reminds me a lot of Duke, Clemson last year. Could Georgia Tech go on a Duke-like run? Yes, I think that Georgia Tech schedule is rough, by the way, but they definitely could. That leads us into the second takeaway, and that is that the Georgia Tech game becomes more important because of their win against Florida State. They're going to be higher up in the standings. Now, Georgia Tech does have a very challenging schedule. We just kind of mentioned that. You look at where, their schedule is. They have Louisville, Duke at North Carolina, Miami at home, NC State at home. They will play Georgia and Notre Dame. But as far as conference play goes, they have a rough slate there as well. They have multiple ranked teams. And there is a good chance they've got Georgia State, Syracuse, VMI. By the time they play at Louisville, Tech could definitely be ranked. They might be ranked as early as next week. Or this upcoming week, I should say. I guess maybe AP polls are going to drop here soon. But there's a chance that they could definitely be 4-0 by the time they come into Louisville. And I've been singing from the hills, singing from the mountaintop. This is not the game that you need to overlook. You can't overlook this team because guess what? The offense returned almost everyone, and that was a pretty good offense last year. It was just going to be a matter of whether or not the defense could take that next step forward. And I think that they caused some rough things for the Florida State offense, and I think that some of Florida State's offensive woes were because of the personnel that they have. But Georgia Tech moved the ball down the field, ran the ball at will against a seemingly very good Florida State interior defense. So, again, this makes it to where the Georgia Tech game becomes more important because it's going to have more severe implications on the conference. Because let's say that Georgia Tech beats you at home. Louisville will then, at that point, be 0-1 in conference play. Georgia Tech will already be 3-0. They'll have Duke, North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Miami, and NC State. Now, those are 5. All could be very tough games, could be losses. But if you let Georgia Tech start out 3-0, at that point, it's going to be challenging if you were to lose to the Yellow Jackets because you still have Clemson, Miami, and other ACC teams that you will need to go up against. So winning that game against Georgia Tech really does help you out, not only because you'll have the head-to-head against the Yellow Jackets, but also because you'll remain undefeated. And the longer you do that, the longer you'll stay in front of Florida State. The third thing that I learned was that I might have hyped SMU up a little bit too much. Now, I know that first games sometimes aren't all the greatest. Teams that are favored by a good amount can overlook certain teams, and SMU completely struggled with Nevada, barely won 29-24. Preston Stone struggled early on. He ended up coming back and having a respectable stat line. Brashard Smith helped the team out with a touchdown on the ground, and then LJ Johnson as well. But Nevada, it took a 16-0 fourth quarter margin for SMU to be able to come back and win this game. SMU also lost last year in the bowl game to Boston College by 9. That was not a good Boston College team. So is SMU as good as I say they have or say they will be? Nah, that's still to be determined. It feels like I was more right on Georgia Tech and I was a little bit more off base with the Mustangs. Will SMU still be able to throw some fits against teams in the ACC? I think that they definitely can. However, they might not necessarily be as good as I portrayed them to be. And that's sort of the issues. You just never know until the games are played. So Georgia Tech seems to be better than the norm. SMU probably a little bit lower than what I had them going. But nonetheless, this still can be a dangerous team. We'll see how they progress ahead of that October 5th matchup with the Cardinals. So the three things that we learned: ACC's wide open. Georgia Tech game becomes more important with the conference implications, and SMU might not necessarily be as good as previously advertised. We're going to dive into a Monday mailbag segment to conclude the show. A lot of great questions were asked. We'll break them down and answer coming up on the next segment of Locked On Louisville. Today's episode of the show also brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. 5 Hour Energy has basically saved me with these seasonal allergies. Louisville weather is going back and forth. It's killing my allergies. Thus, it's killing my overall energy levels. 5 Hour Energy has helped combat some of that loss. And a lot of the issues are after lunch. Like I hit that wall after lunch. 5 Hour Energy picks me up. It helps me get over that wall instead of crashing into it. With zero sugar and a convenient portable size, it's the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. The 5 Hour Energy website has flavors galore like watermelon, tropical burst, grape, berry, and there is a flavor for everyone. Try them all. If you go to 5hourenergy.com, that is the number 5, hourenergy.com, and get some 5 Hour Energy product today, you can use my promo code LOCKEDONCFB, that's all caps LOCKEDONCFB, to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Once again, go to 5hourenergy.com today. And into the final segment of this Monday edition of the show. It's officially game week, y'all. Like, this is the first time that we've been able to say that since last December. So iconic. The vibes are incredible. Absolutely wild. The heat is off the charts right now. Let's hope it cools down a little bit before that kickoff against Austin Peay. But the mailbag, that doesn't need to cool down. The questions, fire. We're going to answer them. First question I got. Will this Louisville defense be the best in program history? I think I'm not a huge person to make hot takes, but I can't remember a time in my lifetime where the team has brought back 2 potential All-Americans between their junior and senior season. I think that this is going to be one of the better defenses in my lifetime. Will it be the best? I'm not sure. Charlie Strong had some really good defenses. Bobby Petrino and Todd Grantham had some good defenses. So I think it's going to be among the best. Probably, I'd say, here's the thing about it is, like, you're discrediting some of the Cardinals' defenses. So could it be top 10? I think it definitely could. The best of all time in program history, I think that's a little bit too severe of praise at the moment until we've seen this team play. If halfway through the season they're looking really dominant, then we can have that conversation. But at this point, I'm just not necessarily sure. I think it's going to be a really good defense. So just because it's not the best in program history doesn't mean it's not a great defense. So TBD. With the Florida State loss, who do you think would join Louisville if they made the ACC championship game? For the record, I do think Louisville gets back to Charlotte. And also for the record, I said in the Twitter space last week that I don't think it's going to be Florida State. I think Florida State's a 3-loss team with DJU at quarterback. There's 2 teams that I'm looking at. I think that Miami is one that I could definitely see making it. My dark horse is NC State. Really good defensive coach team with Dave Doran. They've got Grayson McCall at quarterback, who I think that a lot of their offensive issues last year was with the quarterback. And then you also have Casey Concepcion, one of the best receivers in the conference, potentially in the country as well. So I'm going to cheat here. I'm going to say that it's going to be either Miami or NC State that joins Louisville in Charlotte for this year's installment of the ACC championship game. Next question. With the college football playoff allowing 4 conference champions to get first-round buys in the college football playoff, what are your thoughts on that overall rubric and guideline? I mean, I think that if your goal is to incorporate the top 4 conference champions at some point, giving them the first round bye is like the easy way of doing it, because if you don't, I think that it really, I don't know. There's 2 ways to look at it. Like, it makes it simple to where, like, you don't leave things as much up to interpretation. Like, you have one guideline, and if you win your conference championship, you have a first round bye. But you also make it to where, you could win your conference. Like, there's a team that maybe they don't do well in the outer conference games, but they do well in conference play, and they make the conference championship. And maybe AP ranking, maybe they're not even like barely above 20, but they win the conference championship and they get that bye, and it just creates some havoc. And then you put it this way, you're not going to make everyone happy. Everyone's going to have some sort of a gripe. That's just the way things are with these playoffs. It is what it is. I'm okay with it, especially for Louisville's sake. Like, if Louisville were to win the conference championship, but they're still on the outside looking in of the playoff, getting that first round bye, I'm okay with them just getting a guaranteed berth into the playoff. Like, it doesn't matter if it's a bye or not, but getting a berth into the playoff is key. So the final question that we have, with Amari Huggins-Bruce coming back, how much does this raise the ceiling when Caullin Lacy is healthy? Very good question, assuming that he is indeed going to be eligible. I think that it just gives you more insurance. I think that it gives you more ways that you can deploy Caullin Lacy. It gives your team more of a boost in some important games against Notre Dame, against SMU, against Georgia Tech as well. So having a guy in the slot that upgrades your wide receiver room when you have some key games early on in the year, I think that it definitely means a ton, and it's definitely significant. So in terms of the ceiling, I don't think that AHB is going to be in the top 3 of receiving yards for the Cardinals. I think that that's going to be Brooks, Bell, and Lacy, but having a guy that could be in the top 5 coming back, it's significant. I don't think that it's going to be the difference between getting you into the playoff or keeping you out of it, but I do think that it's going to help your team. It could end up helping you win a game that you weren't originally going to, potentially. It just really depends. So I'm really excited for him to come back, put it that way. That is going to wrap up the mailbag. That's going to wrap up this Monday edition of the show. Going to be a weird week for content. There will be 3 more episodes this week. They will all probably air during the morning or mid-afternoon. We'll have a preview of that Austin Peay game, although that's going to be a contest that Louisville should win fairly handedly. So we're going to give a little bit of a preview with that. We'll talk players to watch, keys to the game, what we're hoping to see, maybe even some basketball recruiting, and much more. So everyone have a great start to your week. We'll see you right back here coming up soon.